Hey everyone, welcome back to the Transfer Portal CFB podcast and our YouTube channel presented to you by NoContextCFB. We're here with our weekly off-season podcast episode coming to you every Wednesday as we look forward to the 2023 college football season. My name is George Novak. I'm your host today, and I'm joined by Parker Gillum.
Hey
And
guys, good to be here.
yeah, how we doing? How we feeling? We're midway through June right now, and we countdown's at about 80 something days, right, till kickoff of the 2023 season.
Yeah, I do. I'm feeling like we're hitting that part of summer where June's flown by and July is really those dog days of the off season where it just feels slow. But getting through that, you hit August, it speeds up. So hoping to get through that, getting to the magazine in a couple weeks, that'll really help kind of speed up the process as well.
Yeah, exactly. And as Parker just mentioned, big thing we want to mention today, the magazine coming out July 5th. It's our first ever edition of the Transfer Portal CFB preview magazine. This year it's a digital magazine PDF publication being sold for $9.99 with loads of content. We'll have in-depth interviews from players all over the FBS from different conferences and different teams. 20 plus player focused articles and 10 feature articles, as long as well as a breakdown of all 133 FBS teams. And we'll also have other segments in the magazine covering preview classics such as Heisman watch list, All American teams previews, all conference teams and previews, bowl projections, and different coverage for overs and unders and projections on how we think each of these teams are going to fare this year, along with some rising stars and people to watch out for. So the magazine drops exactly 2 weeks from today, so don't miss it. July 5th, and it's $9.99 to download. And don't forget to give us a like here and subscribe here and on YouTube, and leave a comment or a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. You can find all of those in the description. It's the Transfer Portal CFB. So thanks everyone for the support, and we're happy to dive into a couple of our topics today.
Yeah, so
So
kind of to start off and ease us in, week one, there's been a lot kind of made about it's a little bit drier this year. You have presumed top 10 matchup with between LSU and Florida State, but that's Sunday night. You got to wait a little bit longer for that. Not a ton that you like. South Carolina, North Carolina might be a ranked matchup. Penn State, West Virginia. There's some underrated games that I kind of wanted to point out today that I think are, they're not going to steal the headlines by any means, but they're important for a lot of these programs. I wanted to start off with Thursday night, Nebraska going to Minnesota, going to go for his 10 to play early season Big Ten contest. PJ Fleck this season, you lost Tanner Morgan and a lot of the veterans that had been there for multiple seasons. And it's going to be the cupboard's a little bare this year. How are they going to be able to maintain the level of play after that kind of upstart 2022 season? And of course, Nebraska, it's the start of the Matt Rule era, another coaching change. Is this going to be the answer? There's been a lot of hype surrounding Georgia Tech transfer Jeff Sims, a quarterback in the spring. How is he going to stack up so far? So it'll be interesting. Pretty evenly matched game, at least on paper. So, I mean, what are your kind of early thoughts on who could come out on top, especially on the Thursday night?
yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting game. I wouldn't say it's like a barn burner that we would traditionally love to talk about week one, but I'm actually kind of excited for the Matt Rule era. I think I was a fan of Scott Frost the hire. I was not a fan of Scott Frost the coach, but kind of turning the page on that one, Matt Rule's a fantastic hire, and not necessarily I don't know if he's necessarily a quarterback whisperer, but Jeff Sims is more or less an experienced quarterback. He's proven that he's at least capable at the D1 level, and moving over to somewhere like Nebraska, I think he has an opportunity, especially filling in for Casey Thompson leaving, to kind of make a name for himself and to kind of turn the page and start anew. And I think Matt Rule's a good level set, even keel coach to do that with. So I have Nebraska. I think Nebraska's going to start off on a good foot with the Matt Rule era, and I don't really see them making too much noise in the Big Ten, but I see them at least, starting off a little bit. People will start to have the conversation with Nebraska saying, "Oh, is this the answer? Is Matt Rule the answer?" he could be. I don't think he's the answer this year.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's interesting to point out getting out to start on the right foot. That's so often what plagued Scott Frost during his tenure, losing some early season games, some upsets. If you go down at Minnesota, while it's not a horrible loss, starting 0-1, people are going to say, "Here we go again." Is a
Mm.
bowl game even going to be in the cards at that point with such a winnable game? Those are kind of questions people would be asking. So there's certainly the more pressure as it tends to be is going to be on Nebraska in this game. We're going to see how they're going to handle it under Matt Rule. Another game I
Mm.
want to point out, and it's being talked about a bit, but Boise State versus at Washington, Seattle. Broncos these past couple of years have had relative success, yes, but they have not been in kind of that national spotlight that they're so accustomed to in a while. They could accomplish that by going on the road and beating what looks to be a top 15 Washington team this season. However, that will be incredibly difficult given what Washington is returning, especially on the perimeter and at quarterback, of course, with Michael Penix Jr. Do the Broncos have a chance? Do they cover the spread potentially? Or do you think this is the start of a Penix Jr. Heisman campaign, Washington playoff run?
So that I like the phrasing of that because do they cover the spread is a little talk in my language because while I think that Washington's going to take care of business, I do think it might be close for a half. I think Michael Penix Jr. in the early part of the season, especially, is going to start off on fire. He's going to be, the top three, top five Heisman watch list for the first 4+ weeks of the season. I do personally think he's going to fall off of that trajectory and of that path, but I think he's going to start out on fire, and I think Boise State's just not going to be able to keep up. It might be a little slow rolling in the beginning, but I'm going to take a guess that the spread's going to be probably 9.5, and I don't think they cover.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I think the concern with Boise State, you've got Taylor Green coming back quarterback, showed some promise last year. Where else is the offense going to come from after they were
Mm.
kind of sluggish last year? The defense has been solid, but not great for the most part these past couple of seasons. How is that going to hold up on the road in Seattle? And especially when Washington is Michigan State in 2 weeks, I agree with you. I think Michael Penix has a chance to make a real Heisman statement in the first 3 weeks of the season, and he can
Mm.
definitely do so. Another guy, maybe a very, very deep Heisman dark horse, but he appears on the cover of our magazine, so got to shout him out. Frank Harris at UTSA. He's going to be going on the road to take on the new Big 12 member, Houston Cougars. Last year's matchup, week one, in San Antonio was incredible. Great game, went to overtime. Houston escaped with that win. This time around, Houston going to the Big 12. This is a game you really can't afford to lose if you want to be able to tread water in non conference play. Frank Harris lost a couple of his weapons, but he's still Frank Harris, one of the most veteran
Mm.
quarterbacks in the country, a real playmaker. And that program has ascended to a level where they can retool year in and year out. Also, so many recruiting kind of implications on the line here, especially in the Texas area. I expect it to be another close one for sure. I'm giving Houston a slight edge as of now, but I mean, what are your thoughts on UTSA potentially pulling off that upset?
Yeah, I was gonna say in my head, I see this as Houston being a slight favorite for this game. I actually like UTSA to pull off the upset. I think they had good momentum built like from last year. Um, I just don't think Houston is going to be able to hold them off. I think the experience from UTSA is going to be enough to at least push them over the edge or get it done on the road in Houston. But or no, is that at UTSA? Where's that
It's
one?
at Houston. This year it's at
Okay,
Houston. Last year's at the Alamo Dome.
gotcha. No, I think UTSA is going to be able to pull it out though. I don't really think Houston's going to get off to the best start in the Big 12 this year, but we'll see. We'll see how they end up. But I like UTSA. I do think it's going to be a close game, like you said, but I like them pulling off the upset.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it in previous podcasts and some articles as well that I think Houston's real success in the Big 12 is going to be long term, not short term for them. And
Mm.
I think out of the four teams joining, I think they have the best long term outlook, just based on location, et cetera. But not a different game, not going to be necessarily not talked about, but I don't think people are understanding the type of matchup we're about to get Saturday night, North Carolina, South Carolina. More than likely, both teams are going to be ranked. I personally think this could go down as being one of the better quarterback matchups of the season, with Drake May going up against Spencer Rattler, against two defenses that solid at times, nothing spectacular these past couple of years. I think they can have a lot of success, especially week one.
Mhm.
It could be a shootout. That's the early feeling I have. Neutral site game in Charlotte. There's always NC State gets in the mix sometimes playing their early season. There's always some good games that go down there. So very pivotal game for two teams that are also trying to, potentially be dark horses in their own conference title races. Who do you think comes out on top? I would imagine if we've been talking odds a little bit. This is going to be one that's you're looking at Carolina by maybe 2.5, 3.5.
Yeah, I think our odds have been spot on, at least with each other. We'll see how they do with
I'll
Vegas.
add South. I said Carolina like that would specify anything. I'll add
Mhm.
South Carolina by 2.5,
Oh,
three and a
okay.
half to make that clear because yeah, that
I
made no sense.
No, that's fair. Actually, I guess we're not spot on. I had a feeling that UNC, excuse me, so North Carolina, I thought might be favored by around the same, by a
Okay.
little bit less than a field goal. Um, but I mean, South Carolina was on a heater at the end of last year. Spencer Rattler started to look like the quarterback that we all thought he would be when he committed to Oklahoma a few years back. So I do, if South Carolina's favored, then I like the favorite, but whoever we think is favored in this, I do like South Carolina. Um I think this is going to be a big test, though. I don't really think it's an indictment on Drake May or Spencer Rattler, either one of them, if they lose this game, because we'll see what they do for the rest of the season. But I have both of these guys, going pretty deep in the Heisman race. I think Spencer Rattler has the confidence, and he's got the name, and he had the hype built up for years. It fell off, and completely fell off, having to leave Oklahoma, and has started to build back credibility with the end of the season last year at South Carolina. So if they can pull this off, he can go. I assume that's going to be a primetime game against a primetime opponent. He's going to be able to put his name right back on the potential Heisman watch list. But I think realistically, the implication of this game is going to be talked about in on the draft boards, maybe
Mhm.
maybe just as much as it is for conference titles. But I like South Carolina in a close one. I do think it's going to be a shootout. I know UNC lost some weapons, but I you're not really going to be able to hold down Drake May and their offense for too long, and neither team has a defense that's going to be stellar. But I think
Mhm.
close matchup, but South Carolina, I think, pulling it off.
Yeah, we'll be it's 7:30 ABC that matchup on Saturday
Yeah.
night. So it'll definitely be a good one for the lights. I do like your point about the Heisman. Maybe it is not necessarily a de facto Heisman elimination game, but it's going to give one guy a major leg up
Mhm.
over the other one for the rest of the way out. So there's also kind of that in the cards as well. We'll throw out another quarterback that's kind of a deep dark horse on the list. People didn't think he was going to be back in Conway, South Carolina this year. Entered the transfer portal, I believe, back in mid-February. Or earlier than that, returned in mid-February, announced that he returned to Coastal Carolina. Grayson McCall, back for what seems to be his 20th season of college football. On the other side, he'll be taking on a brand new quarterback, at least a new starter day one. DTR has gone from UCLA. And so now you're looking at, is it 5-star Dante Moore coming in, who's been heralded as the savior? Ethan Garber's veteran that transferred in a couple years back. Is it going to be him? UCLA's had a tendency to play some lower level teams close early in the season, even with a weaker schedule. Coastal Carolina is not going to be a team that's going to come in and just roll over. They're going to test them late at night. Another game. Is the upset happening here? Does Coastal Carolina cover that spread that, maybe we'd say is 10 to 14 points probably for UCLA, somewhere in that range?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think UCLA is going to be looking good in terms of the spread, moving into this game. I actually think it's going to be closer. I think Coastal Carolina will keep it within a score, or keep it, let's call it single digits. They'll keep it within single digits. But the way I kind of see this game playing out, weirdly enough, is similar to I think our introduction to Klubnik from Clemson, when DJ Uyunglele struggled a little bit, and that game was, I forget who they're playing, when the game was close in the first half, and then they brought in Cade Klubnik, and he kind of took off running in the second
Mm-hmm.
half, and he kind of showed the world what he can do. So I see that sort of happening here with Coastal Carolina keeping it close, maybe having a lead at the end of the first half, and then UCLA and Chip Kelly wanted to go with Dante Moore and turning the page for the new era. Him in the All-American Under Armour Bowl game was incredible. He was a sight to be seen. So I think if they're at all struggling in the first half, it's going to be fans screaming for him, everyone looking for him. He's looked good at practices. I think it's kind of a natural fit, and he's got the confidence, he's got the poise to come in as a starter day one. So we'll see how they do. I do think it'll be a quarterback battle going into the first week, but I think by the end of this game, Dante Moore will be solidified as the starter, and UCLA will be 1-0.
And he fits what Chip Kelly's system wants to accomplish, his skill sets. Obviously the dual threat ability, but I think just the creativity and the playmaking, that's something Chip
Mhm.
Kelly, his best quarterbacks, those are the characteristics they've had. Um, Speaking of a couple of quarterbacks, you mentioned Cade Klubnik. We're gonna talk
Mhm.
about him as well, but I won't even say to the casual, to the football fan that may not pay attention year in and year out, they see Clemson versus Duke on Monday night and they think, why would I watch that? I'll raise you this. The Duke Blue Devils, an 8-win team last season, return a lot of production, including a quarterback by the name of Riley Leonard, who we were just talking about, playmakers, one of the better dual threat quarterbacks in the country, very efficient, clean with the ball. Um, Mike Elko hiring last season was, as it proved to be throughout the 2022 season, one of the better head coaching hires anybody made last offseason. It seems like he's got this program really on the right track. It's a Duke team that this season flying under a lot of radars, but they have the pieces to surprise some people. You can make your statement week one by beating Clemson, who is looking to have this revitalization season where they enter that playoff mix again behind Cade Klubnik. It's going to be a battle. Does Duke have it in them to be able to pull this off?
I do agree with you. I think Duke is moving in the right direction. I do like Riley Leonard, excuse me, but I don't see them pulling off an upset against Clemson. I have Cade Klubnik as one of my top five finishers in the Heisman this year. I'm super super excited to see what he can do with a full season and a full off season, more specifically with the coaching staff, strength coaches, being able to watch film the entire off season. He's an incredible athlete. He's has incredible tools around him and incredible personnel around him because Clemson still, every cycle they're getting a top 10 recruiting class. So they're going to be able to reload some of the talent just because, their offense has been a little bit dry the past couple of years. I think that's just because who they had a quarterback. DJ was more of a running quarterback, more of a one read, a little bit head down, seemed overwhelmed at times, and couldn't really create the way they wanted to. He can run and get first downs, and I think Cade Klubnik can create extremely well when the pocket breaks down, when he's rolling out. He's got a great arm. I think that Duke's going to do a good job in the very beginning containing him, but once he gets a little bit of freedom and makes one or two throws to get his confidence up, I think he's going to be able to help Clemson run away with the game.
I've gone back and forth with this throughout the offseason because it's one of those where your heart says Duke and your head says Clemson. I think I'm going to end up going with my head and say Clemson is more than likely going to come out on top, but I think it's one of those games that is going to test them early in the season. One of those games that Dabo likes because you've got F Florida State coming to Clemson, South Carolina in week 4. This is
Mhm.
almost a game that you need to test you to prepare you for something like that so early in the season. So maybe this ends up long run being a great game, even if Clemson only wins by a little bit and people are saying, Clemson's still falling off, Dabo needs to be out, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll
Mhm.
see on that front. But we did touch a good bit on Cade Klubnik with this. That kind of perfectly segues us into our next point of talking about some of these first year high profile starting quarterbacks. Cade, of course, started a little bit last season, but all things considered, this is his first true season at the helm with the keys to the offense. Another guy that kind of this is certainly his first season, has bided his time for multiple years now behind one of the most veteran, oldest quarterbacks we've ever seen in college football. Carson Beck, former, if I'm not mistaken, 5-star recruit, now
Mhm.
getting his turn at the helm at Georgia, and it's a situation where a lot of people label it as manage the game, be efficient, don't turn the ball over, and you will win championships. Can Carson Beck be that guy? And also, can he be more than that for Georgia and potentially take them to that next level where they can win that third straight championship?
Yeah, no, that's a good point about, being a game manager and is that enough? Because a lot of people, that's what they saw Stenson Bennett as, which more or less, I would agree that he was majority a game manager, but when you watch some of the throws he made and some of the decisions he made extremely tight window throws and had a lot of anticipation on a lot of his throws because he doesn't have the cannon of an arm that some of the other quarterbacks have, where he could just step back and on his back foot sling it, 40 yards to the opposite hash. So I think people maybe underestimated a little bit the actual mental portion of the game that Stetson Bennett really played with. And they actually also underestimated his athleticism a little bit too. He was, able to scramble for a few scores in the college football playoff as well. So, while I see Carson Beck not, being able to step 100% in those shoes just yet, I do think Georgia's supporting cast around him is enough to have them at least be really seriously in the playoff contention or in playoff conversation deep into the season. I don't necessarily think they're going to three-peat this year, but I think it's a down year for Alabama. I think the SEC East is not necessarily the toughest. So I do think if he can use the early part of the season to kind of get his feet under him and start to like figure out the offense, get the ball to Brock Bowers, you know, use some of the playmakers that Georgia has. Georgia can lean on their defense and running game a little bit more, and they can get him to where he needs to be to actually be competitive in the playoffs.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned Bowers, who obviously will be one of, if not the biggest mismatch in the country this season. I'll also
Mm-hmm.
throw another name in there. Missouri transfer Dominic Lovett coming in, was easily the Tigers. Luther Bird may have been the most, explosive playmaker on the team. Lovett was easily the best downfield threat and probably the most consistent target throughout the season for them in a less than successful or potent passing attack. Add him in where he's going to have a lot more talent around him. He's not going to be the number one option. He won't be getting the number one, or he won't be getting all the coverage kind of keyed in on him every possession. He's another guy that could really explode. Lad McConkey, a sure-handed guy. There's weapons in place for him, Carson Beck to come in and have immediate success. And also your point about the schedule sets up to where he can early season really settle his way in
Mm-hmm.
before things kind of heat up. Um, but next up is one of probably to me the biggest wild card of the 2023 season because I think he can change so much with how he ends up playing this year, and that's Drew Allar at Penn State. Because again, and I hesitate to say this because Penn State has on paper been a playoff caliber team the past 4 or 5 years and as it got done. But this has the potential to be the best team that James Franklin has fielded at Penn State, with the talent that they have accrued right now. Drew Allar has been heralded as, we've thrown this term a lot out today, but heralded as the savior of this program right now, the guy that's going to break through that threshold of the playoff. He's got all the pieces around him. That running game is going to take so much pressure off of his shoulders. But will he be able to beat Ohio State and or Michigan? Will he be able to win the Big Ten and get to that playoff? To do so, personally, I believe he has to step right in and play at that 5-star level and be that future NFL quarterback to be able to believe him there. And he has time obviously, but this first season if they want to make the playoff he has to be that game changer now as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
later on.
Yeah, I think out of this entire list of quarterbacks, my biggest struggle to maybe peg where I think they're going to end up is Drew Allar, and that's just for this season. I think Drew Allar is going to be a fantastic quarterback, but this season specifically, he's walking into a buzzsaw of Michigan, Jim Harbaugh's Michigan team, who is the returning Big Ten champs. They went to the college football playoff. They have a 5-star in JJ McCarthy coming back, and we already talked about Blake Corum in the running game, or we're going to talk about Blake Corum in the running game shortly. But he's, Michigan's kind of the big dog in the center of the ring right now, and Ohio State coming face to face with Ohio State's offense. If Drew Lard wants his offense to be able to win some games, seeing them across the field with Mbuka, Marvin Harrison Jr. I know they have a new quarterback in Kyle McCord potentially, but you know I think their running game and Trayvon Henderson, and they're just going to be a really, really scary team to go up against. So I think Drew Lohr, while I think he's going to be successful at Penn State, I think maybe the next season, maybe 2 seasons, he's going to be one of the highlights of the Big Ten. I don't know if I see him getting it done against those two teams, and I think Penn State's win loss over under is 9.5 right now, and that's basically just saying those are the two biggest games in their schedule. Can you take care of business everywhere else? I think you can. So um, I think I I struggle to see where he's going to end up for the entire season, but I would say I think he's going to have a great year, and I think he is the difference maker Penn State needs. I just don't know if they get over the hump this year.
Yeah, and I mean it'll be tough. You have to go to the Horseshoe,
Yeah.
and then I mean hosting Michigan, obviously, but and of course things don't get any easier in 2024 when USC and UCLA kind of get added to the mix as well.
Mhm.
Keeping it in the Big Ten, though, you touched on Colin McCord a little bit. We could go on and on about the weapons that he has around him. I feel like I mean, that is a horse that has been beaten many times, I would imagine. McCord himself, is very talented in his own right. I feel like a lot of people do kind of focus in on the weapons he has in the offensive system, and they don't focus on McCord himself being a talented individual. Um, does he have? I guess my question would be: does he, in this first season, make it not just the Marvin Harrison Jr. show? Is it the Kyle McCord offense to where it's like how Stroud and Marvin Harrison and JSN, they were all stars,
Mhm.
as opposed to maybe McCord just taking a back seat? Is that a reality this season, or is McCord just kind of going to just get the ball to Marvin Harrison and let him work? And
I
Emeka, of
think
course.
yeah. I think it's going to be the Marvin Harrison Jr. show, but it will be featuring Mbuka and Kyle McCord as well. I think early on it might seem like he might be making easier throws. I know Cade Stover's coming back at tight end, and he's projected to be one of the top three, maybe top five tight ends that are going to go in the draft next year. So he's going to have some trusted hands in Mbuka and in Cade Stover and Marvin Harrison Jr. But I think in order for Ohio State to get where they need to get to, which I think they have a chance to. He's going to have to, spread the ball out a little bit more, and I actually think Marvin Harrison Jr. will help open up some of those lanes. I know they have a good running game. I know I mentioned Tavion Henderson and that they're going to be able to move the ball on the ground, but I think the amount of pressure that a deep threat like Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to put on the defense is going to open up a lot of lanes, and it's going to help. It's going to help Kyle McCord see the field a little bit better. And I do love mentioning the fun fact that Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kyle McCord actually played together in high school too. So they do have a connection. They do understand each other. I do think, you know, everyone on that offense has a chance to shine together this year, but I can't, I can't fight against the instinct just thinking that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be the shining the brightest.
Yeah, and I do think it's an interesting trend that kind of just popped in my head though recently about how Ohio State these past couple of years, the number one wide receiver kind of entering the year and towards the end of the year, you had Chris Olave, who was number one in 2021, but JSN kind of took over towards the end of that season, had the great Rose Bowl. Next year, JSN came in as the presumed, star on campus. Obviously, injuries played a major factor in that, but then Marvin Harrison kind of took over and now became the guy. Is it a season where Marvin Harrison is so keyed in on? You got guys like Emeka, maybe Julian Fleming as well.
Mhm.
And of course, that recruiting class full of, I had three top 60 prospects at wide receiver in that. Maybe one of those guys steps up as well and it kind of takes over as the top guy. We'll have to see. McCord's got plenty of options. That's kind of the moral of the story here. Another guy who has not the same caliber of options, but plenty of options and perhaps the most QB friendly system in the country, Joe Milton at Tennessee, the man who could throw an orange a country mile, but people doubt on whether he can get that orange, into the breadbasket of his wide receivers downfield. Is this a case of Josh Heupel's offense, which many of has I saw someone recently kind of label it as the triple option, but just passing essentially, to where it's just everything is just automatic, to where you are read, 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 and there will be something there essentially, and not a lot of pressure is put on the quarterback and the receivers to make quick decisions. Is it a situation where the system makes Joe Milton and he kind of steps in and has a great year? Do we see kind of Nico step in later this year as that 5-star recruit that people presume will be the future. How do you evaluate what Joe Milton will do this year after a long career transfer from Michigan, waiting his time? This is his shot.
Yeah, I think this is his shot. He definitely has the keys at least to start the season in Josh Heupel's offense. I don't really see him taking off the way people do. I know maybe I'm a little bit against the grain on this one. I'm not really on the Joe Milton hype train. I mean I do love his arm. I'm a sucker for someone who could throw a football 60 yards from a knee and maybe try to hit the crossbar and whatever. But I think while some of the deep passes are super pretty to look at, I think he struggles with accuracy at times, and he has a little bit of trouble with some of the touch throws because a lot of his throws are just him firing away. He trusts his arm a lot, which is a great sign, but a lot of the throws he just relies on arm strength to try to shove it right through the defense instead of trying to make a different read. And like you said, Josh Heupel's offense is a little bit of, the option, but for passing, making certain reads and being able to manage the game a little bit. And, you know, being able to watch, last year and watch their offense work, it was, I think, people didn't give it as much credit as it needed for, they just had a couple of really dynamic receivers on the outside and people just thought it was a lot of go routes and stuff like that. But there's a lot more nuance to the offense than I think people initially realized. So I think if I had to give a grade, I think I see Joe Milton struggling a little bit. I don't know if it's a struggle enough to really lose his job, especially early in the season. But I think maybe midway through the season, we might see Nico a little bit in certain packages or peppered in maybe towards the end of some of the games or something like that. But I think truthfully, I think Joe Milton's just kind of keeping the seat warm for when Nico's going to take over next year.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. I do think you mentioned the weapons as well. A lot of people do key on the fact that you lose Jalen Hyatt and Cedric
Mm.
Tillman. How do you recover from that as well? But you do have guys. I mean, Brew McCoy was the second most targeted receiver on that team. Ramel Keaton had made a lot of big plays last year. Squirrel White as well. All guys that potential. Oregon transfer Dante Thornton coming in. There's a lot that he has to work with. So I think I agree with you on the fact that at the end of the day, there's not going to be any excuses for Joe Milton. I mean, everything is there for him to have success this season. It's whether or not
Yeah.
he's going to finally kind of be able to get it done. Um,
Yeah,
and
and
it kind of
people looked at like Hendon Hooker and thought, Hendon Hooker was transferred around and he's not really running the offense. He's just getting it to playmakers. But I think people didn't give him enough credit for, what he actually did with that offense and took it to the next level.
I mean, it takes a great level of accuracy still to
Mm,
complete the passes that he was with the amount of touch that he had. Especially working. I mean, working with receivers. It's great to work with receivers that are that fast, but anticipating their speed. I mean, I haven't played quarterback myself, obviously, but anticipating their speed, I would imagine, gets very difficult. It takes probably a lot of work to anticipate where high it's going to be.
mm.
But yeah, and elsewhere, they're in the SEC. They're arch rivals. Kind of stewing in the midst right now. They're very grumpy that they have been upsetted by Georgia as kind of the kings of college football in recent years, as many have claimed, with Georgia winning back-to-back titles, Bama no longer being the face of the SEC for all intents and purposes. Quarterback situation this season is very interesting at a time that they really wouldn't like it to be very interesting. With you had Ty Simpson, Jalen Monroe, that were kind of already there for the spring. Ty Simpson was a former big name recruit that many people thought would come in and be that next Bryce Young, Tua, et cetera, et cetera. Coming out of the spring, it was clear Bama was not completely satisfied. Brought in Notre Dame transfer Tyler Buckner. While this would not be his first game starting. While I would imagine that while I'm not in the building, going in and starting at quarterback at Alabama, that is essentially like you are starting anew, just with how that program is run and the amount that Nick Saban and that staff puts on the shoulders of quarterbacks. It's going to be one of the most followed storylines of the season. Bama has been, I like to say, spoiled with the quarterback talent and just proficiency that they've had these past couple of years. Is this a year where they see a drop back in that category? Maybe they have to fall back on, the dominant defensive and running days of old, or does one of these guys emerge and kind of separate themselves?
Yeah, I think Bama is, it was like the suffering from success, right? Like in previous years, they kind of had what we were just arguing with Georgia before and saying, is Georgia's defense, are their weapons enough? Can we just get someone in there to game manage? And we kind of pegged Mac Jones as that person, and then all of a sudden, Tua was in the building and Bryce Young was in the building, and they were competing for Heisman's, and they were, looking at being first overall picks, which it just took Alabama out of the stratosphere into the next one. But I think the step back for Alabama at quarterback is very very real, and I think it was a little bit of a sobering wake up call for Nick Saban and new offensive coordinator Tommy Rees to look at what they had and see, okay, we have 1A, 1B, Ty Simpson, Jalen Monroe. Here's what we think we're going to the season with, and kind of coming to the realization that they don't really think that they can compete because someone like Tyler Buckner wasn't really particularly successful at Notre Dame. I know he had some injuries. I think he broke his collarbone like week 2 of the season. He really struggled the first 2 games of the season, came back, played okay, didn't really play all that much better, and for him to follow Tommy Rees, for Tommy Rees to recruit him out of Notre Dame, obviously shows a lot of faith in Tyler Buckner, but it shows me also that Tyler Buckner thinks that he has a chance to start day one. He wouldn't have followed Tommy Rees. He wouldn't have went to Alabama, with an option to compete for a starting job. He thinks that he's going to be there, and have a leg up right from the get go. So bringing over someone who I think Notre Dame upgraded at the quarterback position, getting Sam Hartman this past year, I can't imagine that, Alabama fans feel super confident with bringing over Tyler Buckner this late in the process and assuming he's going to be their starter for the first week. So uh, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think Tyler Buckner is going to be the starter week 1. I don't think he's going to start the full game. I think there's going to be packages for Ty Simpson, and maybe some read options and RPOs and things to try to just get the ball out of the quarterback's hands as fast as possible and try to move around some of their playmakers and some of their offense, because I think they're going to go back to what we've maybe traditionally thought of Alabama as, being able to run over anybody, have a really strong defense, and just kind of grind people to a halt. So I don't really see this being a lighted up year at the quarterback position for Alabama. I think there's going to be a lot of struggles and a pretty big learning curve going on there. But maybe Tyler Buckner knowing some of Tom Reese's offense off the get go might help him. But I mean, we'll see how he's able to adjust to the SEC.
And maybe going back to that nostalgic Alabama, ground and pound defensive style is what they need to, upend Georgia. Potentially, that's what'll get it done because
Mm,
the alternative really hasn't worked these past 2 years for them for the most part.
mm,
Moving on though, kind of to wrap things up here, we've been talking a little bit of odds throughout this time, so we'll play a bit of an over under game with a couple of props. Um, so Tyler Buckner used to be the quarterback in Notre Dame. The current quarterback in Notre Dame will be Sam Hartman, Wake Forest transfer. Over under 3,000 yards passing. He's thrown for over 3,000 in each of the past 2 seasons. Enters a new offense, of course. With a lot more pressure on his shoulders. It remains to be seen how much the slow mesh that he used so frequently at Wake Forest will be used in the Notre Dame offense. The early consensus, at least through the spring, is that it will be featured, but not nearly as prominently. And then you also have the aspect that out wide, there's not a ton proven. You've got Chris Tyree moving from running back to wide receiver. He's expected to be a great playmaker outside. The recruiting class, with Braylon James and Jaden Greathouse was respectable, but there's just not much proven out there for Hartman to work with. So over under 3,000. I'm going to go out and go ahead and say over. I have a lot of faith in Hartman coming in. And just taking Notre Dame to that next level. I don't think a playoff level yet, but I think they're going to be a lot stronger of a team in their second year under excuse me, I'm blanking on his name, Marcus Freeman.
yeah.
And yeah, so Hartman, I think he's got the tools. People are going to see that he was not just a system-made quarterback. He has great tools and great touch of the ball. So yeah, over under 3,000 with Sam Hartman.
I'm also going to follow you and say the over. I'm a huge sucker for Sam Hartman and the offense that he runs. I know the slow mesh isn't exactly for everybody, but I think he is what made it work rather than what that making him work as a successful quarterback. I know having E.T. Perry on the outside, huge advantage for any quarterback, but I think being able to stack up with Notre Dame and Notre Dame's recruits, I think that's a huge win for Sam Hartman, and I think he's going to raise them to a different level. And also, I watching QB1 season 2 and watching Sam Hartman, I'm a little bit of a sucker and just root for him anyway. And watching him bring a team back to prominence, right? So I also agree with you. I don't think Notre Dame's necessarily going to be playoff caliber this year, but I do think that he's going to have a big year. I have him as one of my early candidates to win the Heisman, and I think Notre Dame is going to be in the conversation, but not quite get there this year. So I'm going to go with over, and I agree with you there.
Yeah, yeah. Similarly with QB1, definitely he pulled me in with that story, just kind of the team he was playing on there.
Yeah,
But yeah,
exactly.
but our yeah next up LSU entering the season with plenty of hype, but a couple of very pivotal games on their schedule that will determine if they can somehow eclipse the very surprising year one under Brian Kelly. LSU at 9.5 wins. You've got road games at Florida State and at Alabama, kind of the headliners. But you've also got tricky road tests against the Mississippi schools as well as Missouri, hosting Florida A&M, Auburn, and Arkansas. 9 wins. If you get to, you're looking at 10, and you can still go with the over and have them losing to Florida State, Bama. But do they also avoid any other upsets on that schedule and take care of the rest of their business? I'm going to go ahead and say no. I think it's a slight step back this season for LSU. I think they lose a close one to Florida State. You lose to Bama. And I think you probably drop either that game to Ole Miss or maybe even Missouri in kind of a real shocking fashion with Missouri's defense. Maybe they catch them in a low scoring affair. I'll take the under at 9 wins for LSU.
Yeah, I think I'm actually exactly the same with you. I think even though they might be close games, I think Daniels is still good at quarterback. I don't think he is everything that everyone thinks he is, but I think that Alabama is going to, be able to just hold them off. I think Florida State's actually going to be pretty impressive this year. So I'm counting those two just early looks as losses. And you kind of mentioned that the Mississippi teams might give them some trouble. I know there's kind of a three horse race for the quarterback at Ole Miss. That's going to be a tough game for them. So I have that game as a toss up, and even Arkansas with KJ Jefferson, I think he just kind of makes things happen, and they always win at least one game that they're not supposed to win, and then maybe drop one or two that they are supposed to win. So I think there's a couple of trap games here, or maybe not even trap games, maybe just toss ups that I don't necessarily think all of them are going to go their way, and I'm putting them pretty squarely at 9 wins.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's that's where the safe money seems to be at.
Mm.
Next up, Heisman contender and Blake Corum at Michigan. He got to 18 rushing touchdowns last season with the end of season injury that caused him to miss the Ohio State game and the playoff. I'll set it at 19 and a half rushing touchdowns. A large number, all things considered, but he's already set a high bar with 18. Can Corum get there in a backfield where, granted, he'll be playing alongside Donovan Edwards, who in
Mm.
his own right could, potentially even reach this number if he was, say, the sole back in a backfield. So as of right now, I'll take the under. I'll probably think that he'll go maybe 16, 17, maybe slightly under that 18 number from last season, especially with Edwards in the backfield. But yeah, what are your thoughts? Because Corum, again, he also missed spring ball, rehabbing the knee still, expected to be back during fall camp.
Yeah, and I think because he had made the announcement, I'm definitely coming back for fall camp. I think the spring ball was mostly precautionary just to make sure that he's 100% ready, and he's not exactly nervous about getting on the field, so he's not going to put himself in extra harm's way. But I'm also going to take the under here. I have this mentally at around 16 to 18. I know 18 last year was kind of his explosive number. And I understand that he missed a little bit of time with injuries, but you mentioned Donovan Edwards. I think having a 1-2 punch in the backfield definitely changes the outlook. So even a healthy Blake Corum going to be a little bit of a step back, and I think JJ McCarthy, full year in the offense, full year running the show, commanding the ship. I think he's going to be a little bit more comfortable too, the way he takes off, especially maybe in goal line situations, and he might steal a touchdown or two that would maybe normally go to Blake Corum. So he might be able to scramble for a couple and use his arm or make a play for some of those shorter touchdowns to, keep this at the under of 19 and a half.
Yeah. Now for the most controversial prop on this list. The SEC, one of the, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't believe I am, the only conference to get two teams into the playoff since its inception. 1.5 SEC teams in the playoff. I'll go ahead and give my spiel on this point. I'm going to take the under because I believe this season that Alabama will get their revenge on Georgia in the SEC title game. Georgia's weak schedule, although they will go undefeated, will plague them on the selection day and will leave them probably sitting at that 5th or 6th spot. This is also assuming, and this is a big assumption, that the Pac-12, ACC, and Big Ten will all have clean representatives that are worthy of playoff spots. I'm talking a one-loss Clemson or FSU, a 1 or 0 losses. Same thing with Ohio State, Penn State, or Michigan. And then the biggest question mark there is with the Pac-12, who has 4 teams that you could argue are capable of doing so, but all play each other on different occasions. And if the Pac-12 has done anything for the past 4 to 5 years in football, it has cannibalized itself to the point where it has no national contenders at the end of the year. I'll go ahead and say, ironically enough, and we'll touch on this. Actually, I won't spoil it for now on who I have coming out of the Pac-12, but it's not who you, I think, would expect. But yeah, give me one SEC team. I'll put Bama in there.
Okay. I'm also going to agree with you with the one SEC team. I think I think the SEC cannibalizes itself a little bit. I do like the idea of Alabama having some revenge on Georgia, and then just quick editorial. Last year, Michigan and Ohio State made it in for the two Big Ten teams. So I think I do think there's 3 horses mostly in the race for the Big Ten. I think Penn State we kind of talked about, Ohio State and Michigan. I think the Pac-12 doesn't necessarily cannibalize itself the way it did last year because USC was a shoe-in before they lost to Utah in the Pac-12 championship. I think USC. This is um, this is Caleb Williams kind of swan song. He's got to take the next step. I know he loves the Heisman and he does really well out there in USC, and he's going to be the first overall pick in the draft. I can't imagine anyone else selecting someone over him, but this is all he really wants, and being able to finish the job and get them into the playoff. So I think you're going to have a Big Ten team. I think you're going to have I think you're going to have a Pac-12 team, and then I can't imagine the Big 12. Actually, I can't imagine them eating themselves. Let's be real. But I think it's either going to be a representative from the Big 12. Clemson might make a run at it, potentially being undefeated out of the ACC, or you might even have another Big Ten team the way we did this year. I think Ohio State and Penn State both have an opportunity to either join or unseat Michigan as the final spot. So I don't see 2 SEC teams going into the playoff. I think it's realistically going to be USC out of the Pac-12. I think UCLA has a chance if Dante Moore is who we think he is, and then I think I'm thinking Texas takes care of business in the Big 12 about time, potentially making it to the playoff, and then I give 1 or 2 teams if one of the others fall out from the Big Ten, and then we get 1 SEC team.
Yeah, I think we could have a very similar conversation about 1.5 Big Ten teams in the playoff as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then I mean, I guess my kind of point with the Big 12, I guess, and I think Texas certainly has the potential to do so. I just don't see a Big 12 team that is going to be playoff. I just look like a playoff caliber team throughout the season. I see Texas winning that conference, but probably at 10-2, maybe 9-3, more than likely kind of in that 10-2 range. But we'll see. But talk a little bit about the Pac-12 for our last prop, USC. touched a little bit on them. I think you kind of already mentioned a little bit about this, kind of how you see them going. But USC had 10.5 wins. This is the season they've been building to for quite a while now. They thought Sam Darnold was going to get them to that national championship level. He was close, but not quite there. Now you've got Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams, all the talent in the world. You also have one of the most difficult schedules USC's probably faced in quite a while. You've got road trips to take on Notre Dame, Deion Sanders' Colorado team, and then Oregon and Eugene. And then you host Washington and Utah. Mind you, in the final out of the final five or 6 games this season is Notre Dame, Utah, California, Washington, Oregon, UCLA. It's about as backloaded as you can get. My stance on it, I'm taking USC. While I don't, here's where I differentiate between what I would put money on versus what I think will happen. If I'm putting money, I'm putting USC under based on that schedule, and I'm taking Washington based on their schedule to make it to the playoff with one loss. Washington has a slightly more favorable schedule than the others. However, based on the talent the USC has, I would be able to see them getting over for sure.
Yeah, it's like the head and the heart debate is like, oh, do I what I think is going to happen versus what, is going to keep me up at night if I bet against, and what I knew was going to happen actually happens. And I'm actually going to go with over. I think they're going to pull off either 11 or 12 wins this year. Their schedule is really backloaded. I think they're going to kind of cruise through the first six, I guess, and it is until they get to Notre Dame, whenever that is. I do think Notre Dame's going to be good. Again, I love Sam Hartman. I think he's going to be in New York or wherever they hold the Heisman this year as one of the finalists. But I think that that's going to be a battle of two potential first round quarterbacks, and USC is going to come out on top. I don't really see. I know this is going to be a clip for me to replay and just shake my head at myself, but I don't see Utah ruining USC's season yet again. I do think Cam Rising is fantastic out there, but I just think this is one of the like Jordan versus the Pistons, and he's just had to like lick his wounds after 2 straight years of losing to them in the Pac-12 title. I think they're going to be able to figure out getting by, and then they have California, who I think they could take care of, and then I do think that they're more talented and will show it on the field for the Washington and Oregon game. I know people hype up Penix and Bo Nix. I do think both of them are special, but I don't think they're nearly as special as Caleb Williams. And I think after they get rolling with some of those big wins, they're going to roll through all those. And I think one of the underrated, scariest games, and it shouldn't be underrated, but judging by some of the preseason seedings, one of the underrated, scariest games is just ending the season against UCLA at the Coliseum. And I think UCLA, while on paper, I think USC should definitely win that game. I think UCLA, if Dante Moore starts the way we talked about earlier and hops in early in the season, he's got a full season under his belt. And I think UCLA with Chip Kelly is going to be definitely a scary team that is going to be very feisty at the end. So I'll give them the over for 10.5 because they have a chance to slip up, obviously, in one of those 5 games that I mentioned, but I think they're only going to slip up in one at most.
Kyle Whittingham just screen recorded this and added it to the long bulletin board of material that he has this offseason of people writing off Utah because yes, USC and Oregon and Washington on paper are better teams, and this appears to be seasons in which they could be strong, but we have doubted Utah countless times in these past, ever since they've really joined the Pac-12, and they've proven plenty of people wrong during that time. Cameron Rising, I have no idea how he's still in, at Utah, but hey, I'm glad to see him for another year, except for when he plays Oregon in Salt Lake City, because that game terrifies me. But we'll see. Kyle Whittingham, I know that how he has built that program. He loves when people write them off and nobody respects them, and it still seems like despite all they've done, they don't get a lot of respect. That's the issue when you play the conference alongside big names like USC, Oregon, and Washington, especially when they're at this level now.
Mm. Yeah, being a preseason top 15 team and still being written off is that's a lot of bulletin board material he's got there. So we'll see.
Yeah. Thank
So
you everyone for listening and watching. Though, if you once again, if you guys can give the show a like, subscribe, follow, 5-star review, all that good stuff, and leave a comment as well below or on Twitter. Just kind of with some of your takes on these prop bets as well as your takes on these quarterbacks and some of your picks for some of those week one games that we discussed. But don't forget to look forward to our first ever Transportal CFB preview magazine. Comes out July 5th again, $9.99, and it's going to be chock full of content about the 2023 season.
yeah, and I'd love for people to sound off a little bit on obviously what we talked about with the quarterbacks, but give us a little bit of feedback how you guys think we did with guessing some of these spreads. I know we were mostly aligned, Parker and I, with some of these spreads, and I'm excited to see where those actually open up at and then where they finish at before the game starts. But coming up in the future, I know still pretty early and a lot of focus on the magazine, which is coming out in 2 weeks, and then following that, once we get into August and start getting closer to the season, I'm looking to put out a lot more gambling content, talk about some of the spreads, maybe some of the opportunities to take advantage of some of the futures preseason, and then for some of the week one areas to look out for, especially when Vegas isn't exactly sharp on who's going to be starting and what to expect for some of these teams. So look out for that coming later in the summer, right before the season starts.
Yeah, and I as well. We've touched a little bit on the kind of the Pac-12 and its makeup entering this season. I'll have a piece kind of within these next couple of weeks, doing a little bit deeper dive into those four top teams, their schedules, how things might play out for them, who has the toughest, easiest schedules, etc. So definitely be on the lookout for that because that was definitely a lot of fun to cover as well.
But yeah, so thank you everyone for tuning in. This has been the Transfer Portal CFB podcast presented by NoContextCFB, and we'll be back again next Wednesday as always for our weekly off-season podcast. So looking forward to seeing you then, and we're signing off.